seated. This morning is our last day in the book of Leviticus. So that should be something that we should praise God for. But as we get into Leviticus chapter 27, there are three quick things that I want us to go through real fast. First, what have we seen? Just a quick summary, quick synopsis of where we've been, where we're going, where Israel went, where we're going as Blue River Community Church, and then also just to give a quick outline of the passage. And so first, what have we seen? Well, God, all the way back in Genesis, God picked one man named Abraham and brought him out of a pagan nation where they worshipped other gods, they did other things there, but he called him out. He said, if you follow me to this place, the land that I will show you, I will make your name great. I will bless you beyond any of your wildest dreams, and I will prosper you, and I will give you many descendants. Your descendants will be as the stars of the heaven, if you look up at night. And so Abraham believed God, he trusted God, and God indeed blessed him. And as Abraham's descendants started multiplying, God sent them into the nation of Egypt, and over hundreds of years, they began multiplying so greatly that King Pharaoh got scared and a possible uprising, and so he put them into forced slavery. And so after hundreds of years of God hearing the cries of his people, he raised up a deliverer named Moses to come in and to rescue his people. And so God led them to the Red Sea, led them into the wilderness, and where they would camp at Mount Sinai. And that's where we've been, kind of in that region of the wilderness for the past several months. And so that's what we've seen. Moses has gone up the mountain, received some laws from God, and come down the mountain, given them to the people. He's gone up the mountain, received some laws from God, and he's come down the mountain and given them to the people. And there's also been the tent of meeting. But basically, God has interacted with his people over and over and over again, given Moses to give to the people the laws and how they're supposed to live with one another, how they are to approach God, laws on the priesthood. How do you ordain priests? What is the priesthood supposed to look like? How are sacrifices supposed to specifically look like? What is a sacrifice? What are clean and unclean animals? Rituals, practices, over and over again that we've seen through the book of Leviticus. And so today is the very last chapter regarding vows, laws about vows. And so where are we going? Well, Israel, specifically, if you just turn the page to the book of Numbers, God is leading Israel. They're going to be journeying towards the promised land. The land that God has been promising since Abraham. I'm going to give them this land flowing with milk and honey. But as we know, because we can look at the account, Israel is going to disobey. They're going to reject God. They're going to look at the people of the land and see that they're giants, their armies and militaries are a lot bigger than theirs. They have reason to fear, and so they're not going to trust God. Even though they've seen all of these miracles, God has miraculously brought them out from under Egyptian slavery. They're going to distrust the Lord. And so God's going to cause them to walk through the wilderness for 40 years in judgment until the next generation is ready to go in and trust him. Where we're going, though, as Blue River Community Church, we are starting next week going to begin, I think this is the plan still, we're going to start through an Easter series, which is obviously going to culminate on Easter with the death and resurrection of Christ. Easter morning is when Jesus Christ rose from the dead. The tomb was empty, the stone was rolled away, and there was no more body in the grave. Jesus rose from the dead, and he offers us that life. And so then after that, the plan is to go into the book of Philippians, which is a New Testament book all about praise, thanksgiving, joy. And the only reason we have any of those things is because of what Christ has done for us. He lived a life none of us could have lived. He died the death we couldn't die, and he rose again. And he offers us victory over sin and death. And so that's kind of the forward-looking, where we are going as a church. And then just a quick outline of this chapter is we're going to look at vows regarding people, vows regarding animals, vows regarding houses, vows regarding land, and a method for everything else. So we're going to see vows regarding people, animals, land, houses, land, and a method for everything else. And so most public speaking events, they always tell you to do the plane method, so where you kind of take off, you have an intro, and as you're taking off, you're going up to about 35,000 feet, and that's the climax. And once you get there, you then start going down, and you want to find a nice smooth runway to have a smooth land the plane. But this is going to be more of a rocket ship type message, where it's going to feel like we're sitting back, blood is rushing to our heads, the rocket booster engines are blasting us through the atmosphere, and we're not coming back down, there's no landing. We've made docked at the International Space Station, but that's kind of where we're going, so don't expect a landing, but we're going to be up there, and then we're going to kind of look down at it. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump into the very last chapter of the book of Leviticus, chapter 27. And just because of the length of it, we're going to read through all of it, but we're going to break it up into sections. So verses 1 through 8 says, "The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, if anyone makes a special vow to the Lord involving the valuation of persons, then the valuation of a male from 20 years old up to 60 years old shall be 50 shekels of silver, according to the shekel of the sanctuary. If the person is a female, the valuation shall be 30 shekels. If the person is from 5 years old up to 20 years old, the valuation shall be for a male 20 shekels, and for a female 10 shekels. If the person is from a month old up to 5 years old, the valuation shall be for a male 5 shekels of silver, and for a female the valuation shall be 3 shekels of silver. And if the person is 60 years old or over, then the valuation for a male shall be 15 shekels, and for a female 10 shekels. And if someone is too poor to pay the valuation, then he shall be made to stand before the priest, and the priest shall value him. The priest shall value him according to what the valuer can afford." And so specifically, as we get into this passage again, we're going to look at vows regarding people, animals, houses, land, and some other things. But this is the only vow, vowing yourself or a dependent, that is referred to as a special vow. And I think that's significant in this passage. It's easy to read over, but God has a special place in his heart for humanity. Above everything else in creation, animals, houses, land, everything else, they're good things. But God looks at humanity and sees something different. Not because of who we are, but because of his image, because of how he has made us. He didn't send his son to die for the angels, or the animals, or houses, or land, or anything else. He sent his son, Jesus Christ, to give his life for humankind. And that is why this is a special vow. Someone could vow their life or dedicate their life. That would be maybe a more common word that we would use. Dedicate their life, or dependent. You couldn't dedicate a neighbor, but you could dedicate maybe a son or a daughter, a dependent of yours. And that is why it is a special vow. In the book of 1 Samuel, there's a couple, Elkanah and Hannah, who the Israelites, again, throughout the Old Testament, they were supposed to journey 3 times a year to Jerusalem to go to the feasts and celebration, to bring their sacrifices there. Well, Hannah was barren. She was unable to have children, and over again, people near her were having kids, but she was unable to. And so just seeing that was tormenting to her, it says. And so one time, whenever they went up to Jerusalem, she was in the temple and she was praying, and she prayed, Lord, if one of those if-then statements, if you do this, if you give me a son, I will devote his life. I will bring him back to the temple, and he will live here. He will serve you here. And God honored that request. God actually did it. And so when Samuel was 3 years old, her son Samuel, 3 years old, she brought him up to the temple and she left him there. And now he had adult supervision, so he wasn't alone. But she fulfilled her end of the deal. And after that point, God opened her womb and she had plenty more children. It was kind of like God was looking at her. Like God knows everything, but he's waiting for Hannah to be faithful. Are you going to fulfill your end of the bargain? And so God actually answered that. Anyway, so you could dedicate your life, or for a time, or forever, in some capacity, or you could dedicate a dependent. And this was a special vow. And another thing to point out is there are gender/age valuation gaps. And I want to point out first that this has nothing to do with minimum wage and the debate now, like whether men make more than females or whatever that's going on in our culture. If you dedicated your life or dedicated a dependent, you actually had to pay the temple. So you're not making any money, you have to pay. So it costs more for a specific person. But second, this has nothing to do with the intrinsic value of a person, of an individual. This specifically is probably more regarding a person's ability to perform manual labor in an agrarian society. And so just for an example, if you buy an industrial-sized lawnmower, that's going to cost more than just a normal push mower, because it's going to perform more physical labor outside on the farm or out in your yard. And so that's just a comparison. Like, this has nothing to do with the intrinsic value of the person, but it has everything to do with just the manual labor that the temple or wherever they devoted their life to would be able to get the work out of a person. And so thus for kids, it was a different valuation. It was a lower level of that. And then at the end of this section, it says in verse 8, "And if someone is too poor to pay the valuation, then he shall be made to stand before the priest, and the priest shall value him. The priest shall value him according to what the valuer can afford." So God is always making a way for people. And this is why this, again, is this special vow. God makes a way for both genders, for all races, people of all languages. He ultimately, this all culminated in Jesus Christ, making a way for humanity to be saved. But God is making a way specifically. If you wanted to dedicate your life or dedicate something of yours to be used in temple services or practices in some fashion, God was making allowance for those who were unable to pay. And so God values people who are rich and who have a lot of wealth. God values the middle class, and God values those who are in poverty. And so wherever we are, we have intrinsic value in the eyes of God. We have a special place in the eyes of God. Again, this is a rocket ship type message, so we're shaking. There's a lot of turbulence, but we're going up. Starting in verse 9, it says, "If the vow is an animal that may be offered as an offering to the Lord, all of it that he gives to the Lord is holy. He shall not exchange it or make a substitute for it, good or bad for good. And if he does, in fact, substitute one animal for another, then both it and the substitute shall be holy. And if it is any unclean animal that may not be offered as an offering to the Lord, then he shall stand the animal before the priest. And the priest shall value it as either good or bad. As the priest values it, so shall it be. But if he wishes to redeem it, he shall add a fifth to the value." You could not only dedicate your life or a dependent, you could dedicate an animal. And it could be a clean animal or an unclean animal. Again, clean animals like sheep and bulls, the animals that would be able to be sacrificed. Unclean animals were like camels, and if you had a vulture, I don't know, those are some unclean animals. But the key thing to notice here is that the clean animals would always be sacrificed. So if you dedicate that clean animal to the temple, it's going to be sacrificed. And it could be, as far as I'm aware, it could be either free will offering, peace offering. There was some sort of offering that it would be used for, but the clean animal would die. It would be sacrificed. And it could not be redeemed. So you could not just, if you made a rash decision, you went ahead and I'm going to devote this animal, but when you got home, you're like, oh, I really need that animal. You couldn't just go back and buy it back. However, the unclean animal couldn't be sacrificed. It was unclean. That wasn't its purpose. That wasn't its job. And so if you went home and was like, man, I really want that animal back for this specific task, or I just like the animal, you could actually go ahead and buy the animal back. But the priest is going to value it and then add a fifth on top of that. So you're going to be paying more money. And part of that, I believe, was to help people to try and think before making rash decisions. There are many rash decisions in the Bible. Joshua and the leaders of Israel, whenever they do eventually get into the land, they've just taken Jericho, they've taken a couple other places over, and the Gibeonites a tribe that's just over the hill. They wear old ratty clothes. They have their wineskins, like water bottles, all kind of broken and tattered. And they come over, and it looks like they've been traveling for many days. They come over, they deceive Israel. They say, we're not even part of this land, but we know that you're coming in and taking it over. We just don't want you to do anything bad to us. We don't want you to harm us or kill us in any way. And so we want to make a covenant with you. And Joshua and the leaders of Israel made a covenant. They just looked at what they could see, and they made a covenant with him. 3 days later, they find that they're actually just over the hill. So they are part of the land. But the key thing in that passage is they did not seek the Lord in their decision. They just rashly made a vow with these people, and thus Israel was unable to touch them. Jephthah is a judge in Judges 11. I do not recommend his practices, but he was in a war at one point, and he said the famous if-then statement, God, if you give me victory, then when I go back home, the first thing that comes out of my house to meet me, I will sacrifice to you. God gave him victory. He won the war. He comes back home, and his daughter comes out to meet him. She's the very first. And he sacrifices her. I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying it's wrong. All we know from that account is that God takes vows very seriously. So we need to be very careful when making a vow. But Jephthah actually went through with it. Again, I'm not condoning that. And that's not a description of what we should do. That's just that's not a prescription of what we should do. That's just a description of something that happened. Jephthah actually did that. Saul, again, made a rash vow. His military, they were going in, fighting enemies, and he was like, the next man to eat something before all of our enemies are destroyed is going to die. Well, his son didn't hear him make that vow and ate some honey, and so Saul wanted to kill Jonathan, his son. Thankfully, Israel saved his life, but Saul, again, made some rash vows going through there. Herod was drunk. Herod, during the time of Jesus, was drunk. He was being seduced by his niece. Yes, all of this is in the Bible. So he wasn't in his right mind, and he said, anything you want, up to half of my kingdom I will give to you. She wanted the head of John the Baptist on a silver platter. He didn't want to do it, but he had sworn to her in front of everybody, and so he had to. And so he had John the Baptist's head cut off and handed to her on a silver platter. The Jews in Acts 23:12 said that cursed we will be if any of us eats or drinks anything until we kill Paul, the apostle. I don't think any of them actually followed through with that, because Paul didn't die for probably a few more years after that. So they weren't successful in their mission. But the point is, we need to be very careful when making vows about anything. They can't be rash. We need to give them serious thought, because God takes them seriously. And so we've seen vows regarding people, vows regarding animals. Verse 14 talks about vows regarding houses. When a man dedicates his house as a holy gift to the Lord, the priest shall value it as either good or bad. As the priest values it, so it shall stand. And if the donor wishes to redeem his house, he shall add a fifth to the valuation price, and it shall be his. Again, someone could vow themselves. Someone could dedicate their animal. Someone could dedicate their house for a specific purpose. And it's not all bad. Maybe they wanted to just dedicate their house for a specific time. And then now they need their house back. And so they would pay the fifth on top of that. So they'd actually be paying the temple more. And so it's good for the temple because they're making more money. But again, it prevents somebody from just making a rash vow. Verse 16 gets into vows regarding land. Again, a lot of turbulence. I know it's kind of shaky. We're getting to the ending. If a man dedicates to the Lord part of the land that is his possession, then the valuation shall be in proportion to its seed. A homer of barley seed shall be valued at 50 shekels of silver. If he dedicates his field from the year of Jubilee, the valuation shall stand. But if he dedicates his field after the Jubilee, then the priest shall calculate the price according to the years that remain until the year of Jubilee. And a deduction shall be made from the valuation. And if he who dedicates the field wishes to redeem it, then he shall add a fifth to its valuation price, and it shall remain his. But if he does not wish to redeem the field, or if he has sold the field to another man, it shall not be redeemed any more. But the field, when it is released in the Jubilee, shall be a holy gift to the Lord, like a field that has been devoted. The priest shall be in possession of it. If he dedicates to the Lord a field that he has bought, which is not a part of his possession, then the priest shall calculate the amount of the valuation for it up to the year of Jubilee. And the man shall give the valuation on that day as a holy gift to the Lord. In the year of Jubilee, the field shall return to him from whom it was bought, to whom the land belongs as a possession. Every valuation shall be according to the shekel of the sanctuary. 20 gerahs shall make a shekel. You could dedicate yourself, you could dedicate your animals, you could dedicate a house, and you could dedicate your land. Again, like last week, the year of Jubilee was a year of redemption. So whenever they would blow the ram's horn, everything, if you had, for some reason, if there were unpredictable expenses that came your way and you were thrown into poverty, you would sell your land or your house, or even yourself in some cases. And in the year of redemption, everything would go back to the family line. Everything would be brought back into your possession. And so if somebody, this even happened, if somebody bought land from somebody else, and let's pretend you still had 30 years till the year of Jubilee. Well, you could dedicate that land that's not really yours, it's just yours for that time. You could dedicate that land to the temple, to the priests, and they would be able to use that for 30 years. And then in the year of Jubilee, it would go back to its original owner. So that's kind of how that would work. But again, there would be a fifth of its value to prevent rash decisions. They could vow land that they had bought from another, which would go back to the former owner in the year of Jubilee. But they could also vow their own land. And so there's a difference too as well in certain aspects of this that we see. There's temporal dedications and then there's lasting dedications. So there's certain things that you could give temporarily. I'm going to dedicate this for a specific time and purpose. But then there's also things that I'm going to give this as a lasting inheritance to the priest or to the temple. And so it'd be a holy gift to the Lord forever. And so there was a difference in that as well. And so we've seen dedications of people, animals, houses, and land. And now this gets into our very last section. It's kind of a method for just everything else, overall basis. But a firstborn of animals, which as a firstborn belongs to the Lord, no man may dedicate, whether ox or sheep. It is the Lord's. And if it is an unclean animal, then he shall buy it back at the valuation, and add a fifth to it. Or if it is not redeemed, it shall be sold at the valuation. But no devoted thing that a man devotes to the Lord, of anything that he has, whether man or beast, or of his inherited field, shall be sold or redeemed. Every devoted thing is most holy to the Lord. No one devoted who is to be devoted for destruction from mankind shall be ransomed. He shall surely be put to death. Every tithe of the land, whether of the seed of the land or the fruit of the trees, is the Lord's. It is holy to the Lord. If a man wishes to redeem some of his tithe, he shall add a fifth to it, and every tithe of herds and flocks, every 10th animal of all that pass under the herdsman's staff, shall be holy to the Lord. One shall not differentiate between good or bad, neither shall he make a substitute for it. And if he does substitute for it, then both it and the substitute shall be holy. It shall not be redeemed. These are the commandments that the Lord commanded Moses for the people of Israel on Mount Sinai. So beginning right in this section, the firstborn, again, you couldn't dedicate the firstborn animal because all the firstborns were already God's. Remember when God was coming to Passover in Egypt, he was coming to rescue the Israelites. He said that every firstborn, whether human or animal, is mine. So obviously you wouldn't sacrifice humans, but you would sacrifice the animals. But then there comes the issue when whether it's clean or unclean. If it's a sheep or a bull or some sort of clean animal, it would be sacrificed. And if it's an unclean animal, like a camel, you couldn't sacrifice it. And that's key to remember, because the clean animal dies. The unclean animal lives. The unclean animal is redeemed, is bought back, gets to keep his life. And so does that sound familiar to the gospel that we proclaim every single week? And that had to do with animals. But the clean one, the only clean human to ever live in this world, Jesus Christ, died for each one of us. But the unclean ones, we have a whole church full right now of unclean individuals. We all get to live because of what the clean man did for us. Clean one dies, the unclean one lives. So Jesus was like the lamb, he was sacrificed, and we're like the camels. We get to be bought back. And so the person who, if I owned a camel, and it had the firstborn is the Lord's, but it can't be sacrificed. So if I want to, I can buy that camel back. If I don't want to, though, the priests are going to put it on the market, they're going to sell it on Craigslist, and someone else is going to buy it. But the point is that it's going to live. But no devoted thing that a man devotes to the Lord of anything that he has, whether man or beast, or of his inherited field, shall be sold or redeemed. This gets into like whether or not you're dedicating it for a time or purpose, or for a lasting inheritance. And so if it's devoted, it is holy to the Lord. No one devoted, this is verse 29, who is to be devoted for destruction from mankind shall be ransomed. He shall surely be put to death. In terms of being devoted for destruction, that basically means someone is devoted to die. So when the Lord told King Saul, the first king of Israel, you need to go in, take control of the Amalekites, and kill every one of them, Saul did not obey the Lord. There was judgment that the Lord was bringing upon that people group, and Saul did not obey the Lord. He brought the king of the Amalekites back, and Samuel ended up finishing the job. But that was one of the reasons why God rejected Saul as king of his people, because he didn't obey God. But this goes into the parallel as well for the New Testament, because Jesus was devoted for destruction. He wasn't ransomed himself. In Isaiah 53:10, it says that the will of the Lord was to crush him. The will of the Lord was to crush Jesus. Why? So that he could bring many sons and daughters to glory, so that he could rescue us, so that he could redeem us, so that we would be able to live. He took our place. There was one missionary that I was talking to, he was a missionary in Papua New Guinea, and the tribe had never before heard the gospel. So they're teaching through it from Genesis, and they're working their way to Jesus. They're in the Gospels, and they're moving right along with his ministry. And all of a sudden, they get to Jesus is being held on trial. And people are yelling, crucify him, crucify him. But one of the tribal men, never heard this before in his life, stood up and yelled, yeah, crucify him, crucify him. And the missionary asked, like, what do you mean? And he said, because if he doesn't die, I don't live. See, he got it. Never heard that account before in his life, but he understood what was taking place. And Jesus was our sacrifice. He was taking our place of judgment. And so tithes, getting in, is just another thing found in this section. If you wanted to, a part of your tithe, a tithe is just a tenth of everything that you have. Even the 10th animal that you have would be devoted to the Lord. And if you wanted to buy it back, you could. But again, the temple is making more money if you do that because it's adding a fifth onto the value. So it's not like you're just taking your tithe away. It's for them specifically. 3,500 years ago, they were paying to get their tithe back, but they were paying more. So the temple was still benefiting from that. And so going through this passage, it was kind of rough, I know, but we're docking now at the International Space Station. So what did we see? Well, we saw vows regarding people, animals, houses, land, and just a method for everything else. So what has God done? Well, God has promised a people all throughout the Bible. He promised Abraham, we're going to make you into a great nation. And the promise actually kind of got bigger. I'm going to make you into many nations after that. So God promised a specific people. I don't know of anywhere where God promised an animal, but he promised a sacrifice. That's Jesus is our sacrifice. So we're going to use an S, so PS. And then for a house, we're going to use an archaic word. We're going to use abode. Like, if you have someone over and you're like, welcome to my humble abode. Like, we're going to kind of use that as house. God promised an everlasting house to David. That was the Davidic covenant, that I'm going to I'm always going to have somebody sitting on the Davidic throne, ultimately fulfilled in Jesus. But God promised a people, a sacrifice, an abode, a land, and a method for all these other things, which spells psalm, if you spell it. So that's kind of the acronym that I'm going for. A people, a sacrifice, an abode, a land, and a method. God brought on the Psalms. And this is why we get to praise God, because throughout this passage, we have reason to praise the Lord. We come to the end of Leviticus, and Jesus fulfilled this book. And the Psalms are all about praising God, worshiping Him, singing praise songs to Him. And that's what we see at the end of the book of Leviticus. We have reason to praise God, because we don't do any of these things anymore, specifically because of what Christ has done on our behalf. And so why does it all matter? Just to end it. Because God is a covenant-keeping, commitment-keeping, vow-keeping, oath-keeping, dedication-keeping, promise-keeping kind of God. He has never failed to keep His end of the deal. He has never failed to keep His promises. He's always been faithful. And so, because of that, we are called to represent Him in this world. And so how are we representing Him? Are we keeping our promises, the things that we say? As we go out throughout this week, are we, like if we say we're going to do something, are we fulfilling that? Are we actually doing that? And so that's what I want us to leave with. As we say things this week, let's try to be more careful with our words. Jesus said, let your yes be yes and your no be no. He actually told them in the New Testament not to make vows. Not to make vows on, like, I swear to the Lord, or I swear on heaven, or on the temple. Like, don't do that. Just because if you end up not doing it, you sinned against yourself. So Jesus, our Savior, our example, actually told them not to make vows. So whether or not that still applies to us, I'm not fully sure, but what we need to gain from this passage is that we need to be careful with the words that we use. We need to think, we need to choose wisely and discern the things that we say to other people. And if we say we're going to do something, like, let's follow through with it. Because God always follows through with what He says. So with that said, let's go ahead and pray.